If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm Kathryn Hansen, and this will be the last episode of 2023. I apologize for my voice. I've been sick the past couple of days, but I wanted to get this out before the end of the year. Thank you so much to everyone who has followed the show in 2023. If you're new here, I want to welcome you, and I also encourage you to subscribe because I'll be bringing more helpful content in 2024 to help you end the struggle with food. If you want to take a big step right now to finish the year with success and prepare for a binge-free 2024, I want to remind you that the Brain Over Binge New Year's Retreat with Coach Julie will take place tomorrow on Zoom. That's Wednesday, December 27th from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're listening before then, I hope you will sign up and join Julie for this highly interactive experience. You will learn and practice guided meditations, future self-visualization and journaling, urge interrupters to use in the moments when you feel that desire to binge, and there will also be plenty of time for live coaching. Even if you're catching this episode after December 27th has passed, you can still get the 2-hour replay video of the retreat. You can learn more and sign up at brainoverbinge.com/retreat. Today I have a topic to bring you that's relevant at this time of year when there seems to be so much to get done and so much pressure on all of us. I'm going to be sharing a conversation I had with Georgie Collinson, who is an anxiety mindset coach, a naturopath, host of the Anxiety Reset podcast, and the author of the new book, The Anxiety Reset Method. She learned to understand and master high-functioning anxiety, and now she teaches others to do the same. She also overcame a struggle with binge eating and restriction, and during our conversation, we'll talk about the ways that anxiety and the diet binge cycle are related. If you're familiar with Brain Over Binge, you know that it's not necessary to master all of your emotions or problems to stop binging. And it's always important to remember that as you work on any other issues that you have. But anxiety is something that may create challenges for you in recovery. And anxiety is also one of those traits that you may have noticed was present before the eating disorder began, and that sticks around even after recovery. And this has been the case in my own journey. So even if your struggle with binge eating is long gone, I know you're going to find help in this episode. Today we have Georgie Collinson on the show. Welcome, Georgie.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here, Kathryn.
Yeah, I'm so happy to talk to you about your new book, and I'm happy to talk to you about anxiety. And before we dive into that, can you just let people know what you do? And I'm sure as we talk, they'll learn more about you as well.
Yeah, so I'm an anxiety therapist and I help women with high functioning anxiety. So these are our high achievers, perfectionists, those who really struggle to slow down and rest and relax. I mean, it's pretty common to see this out in the world these days. And these tend to be the traits that are very much encouraged and celebrated. However, it doesn't take much for us to see the rates of mental health issues, burnout, exhaustion, and other health issues that pop up. I'm a naturopath as well. I see lots of gut issues, hormone imbalances as a result of us just pushing ourselves so hard with this anxious mind telling us, keep going, you can't stop. And so I help those women to figure out how they can master that anxious mind, actually come to a place where we're still getting the stuff done, but taking care of ourselves and valuing ourselves at the same time, listening to what the body needs. I use a variety of different methods and approaches. As I said, I'm a naturopath, so it's a very much holistic health focus, but also, I'm a hypnotherapist, so I work with the subconscious mind and the part of the mind where it's all about what we don't know that we don't know, and delving into that space. It's fascinating, and that's where so many of our fears and habits and patterning can really develop.
Yeah, all that is so interesting. And I see such an overlap with what you're talking about and what I do in my work with people with binge eating disorder and bulimia. I think a lot of the people with binge eating disorder do have a lot of those anxious tendencies and a lot of this push and this perfectionism that you're speaking about. So I think everyone listening is going to find this conversation really helpful. Before we dive more into anxiety, I know you also had some issues with food as well, some dieting behaviors, binge eating. Can you explain a little about that?
Yeah. And I mean, what's so beautiful in a full circle moment is that how I found you, Kathryn, was a number of years ago. Someone recommended your book to me, and that was a huge help for me in working through some of my food issues. But one of the ways that anxiety manifested for me was in I need to control, and I need to control the world and my life somehow. And that sort of manifested in trying to restrict food, trying to control what I was eating. I was very much, what began my learnings in nutrition and naturopathy was very much around how do I get the perfect diet? Because if I have the perfect diet, I'll have the perfect body and I'll have the perfect life and everything will just be sunshine and bikinis and coconuts. But of course, that's not how things eventuated. And in fact, it made the anxiety worse until I figured out how to, what was really driving it and really how to see through what my mind was trying to achieve there. That coming from that place of restriction was never going to get me into a place where I felt calm and safe within my body. So for me, it was really that journey of kind of trial and error, figuring out that that wasn't the real path that I needed to go down. And instead figuring out that I needed to, I suppose, create a sense of freedom around food, and it's freedom and that ultimately that energy around like love that brings us into and helps us heal and come into a whole different kind of way of being. When we're coming from fear and restriction, we're going to create more fear and restriction typically. So that was my pathway through dealing with binge eating. But the restriction that I had around the food rules led to the binge eating, and it was just a vicious cycle. It was so horrible being in it. I would literally be driving home from nutrition lectures where I've just been eating like a bag of nuts in front of all my fellow students. And then, I've got chocolate and things in the car on the way home that I'm just shoving into my mouth because I wanted to hide it and I wanted to put it in the bin before, or the trash before I got home so that no one would see. It was like living a double life, and so sad because of how much, I suppose, pain and shame that was in that too.
Yeah, I know so many people can relate to that. And it's interesting how it kind of all started from this anxiety and this need to control and the need to be perfect. And it's sort of a cultural standard too. And that's something I'd like to dive into. In your book, you talk about this being, and I'm probably going to say this wrong, an anxiogenic culture, if you could say that correctly. And can you talk about that and just how the culture perpetuates anxiety?
Oh, such a beautiful question. Yes, we live in an anxiogenic environment. That means anxiety inducing. So it doesn't take much to just look around the way that our world is set up. We can see we've got endless live news fed to us. And we could go back 2 years, 3 years to the pandemic, and that was anxiety inducing information constantly fed to us. But we don't have to reflect much to think about the current news events that are so in our faces and often happening far away on other sides of the world, where we, as much as like I'm an advocate for doing what we can and wanting to make the world a better place, there is really a sense of helplessness. It's like, I can't actually today do anything to help this situation. Something that's in my immediate community, maybe I can, maybe I can give a homeless person a meal, but I can't necessarily go and help those foreign situations. And our brains are just overloaded with all the problems happening across the entire globe. It's way too much for one little human being and what we are designed for, as in the amount of information we're meant to hold in our mind, in our brain. The other factors to consider, we've got relationship stresses. Relationships are far more complex than they've ever been. We used to have these very clearly defined roles. It was like, I'll stay at home and look after the kids, you go to work. Now there's like, we're negotiating everything. It's a partnership where everything has to be really organized and well communicated. And these are skills that we're not typically well versed in or taught at school. So we're learning so much in relationships. There's a lot that comes up there. We never have enough time. There's just this time scarcity. It's like, how do we fit everything in to these set hours in a day? And most of us go to bed every night thinking, oh, there was all these things that I didn't do. So we're chasing our tails, trying to keep up, feeling like we're struggling. And I mean, that's just to sort of start us off, really. But I would say another piece that's quite anxiety inducing is our disconnect from community. That's a really big one. The way that we have a loneliness crisis across the world too. More people are living alone. More people are living in larger homes alone, and we are not as connected with each other. It's so easy to go to the grocery store. You don't even have to interact with another human. You can just go to the self-serve checkout and not have to make eye contact with anyone. And sometimes if you're having a bad day, that's a nice thing to be able to do. But just for those little interactions that keep us feeling this sense of, oh, there are other humans that have got me too. And we're all in this supportive network. I think those are some of the things that have really become, I suppose, dismantled in the way our modern culture is going. So those are a few elements that contribute to this anxiogenic environment that we're all swimming around in.
Yeah, for sure. And add to that the fact that we're not connecting, maybe with people in real life, but then we're looking at social media and all these perfect images and we think that's how we need to be. And that creates a whole different level of anxiety, is thinking you need to have the perfect body and the perfect diet. And it just can perpetuate this whole cycle of anxiety.
Yeah. And it's no one's posting the moment they cried in the shower or the evening they sat there just with their eyes open, staring at the wall, thinking like, what am I doing with my life? And am I making the right choices? And am I lost? We don't put that stuff on social media, but it doesn't mean that it's not happening.
It's comforting to know that this is something we're all struggling with. And I mentioned earlier that I see some overlap in that a lot of people who end up with binge eating are people who have more of anxious tendencies. And something I read in your book that stood out to me was you said something like, stop telling yourself you're an anxious person. And I thought that was really interesting because I think over time, I do have anxious tendencies and people I work with sometimes have that as well. And I almost think it can be helpful to realize you have these tendencies and kind of accept them and work with them. Would you disagree with that? Should we all stop saying that we're anxious people?
That's such a good question. And I'm glad you brought it up. Where I'm coming from with this concept is that we are so powerful in the way that we choose to define ourselves, the story we tell about ourselves, and in many ways, the identities that we choose as well. And a lot of us can really perpetuate a cycle if we expect ourselves to deal with something in an anxious way, or we expect to bring that high-strung energy. And we don't have to keep expecting that of ourselves. And when we start to shift that narrative, we can create change. Now, of course, we're not burying our head in the sand and saying, I'm just going to pretend there's no anxiety here. Mm-hmm. It's acknowledging, yes, there is anxiety here, but do I have to keep owning it as my anxiety? And I have this problem with anxiety. Can it be anxiety is here today? I was actually having this conversation with a client just yesterday about just thinking of like a city you live in, and one day there might be a rainy day and some days it might be sunny. But do we define that city by the weather that's there for 1 week or one day? I mean, sometimes we do. I think we call Chicago the windy city, right? Yeah. But I'm sure Chicago has its non-windy days, and I'm sure it has its sunny days and all different kinds of weather. And we as human beings are experiencing our emotions just like the changing weather. And for some of us, yes, there are more of those windy days, more of the anxiety that's present. But the more we can detach from that identity, the more we can start to create new expectations for ourselves and new experiences, starting to see that you are so much more than that anxious mind. Just like I would say, Kathryn, there's an overlap in the work that you do around this urge to binge. Like, you are more than that urge. That is a sensation. It's temporary. It's there and it's very powerful in the moment. Anxiety, and I would almost equate that to a form of anxiety. It's quite a intense, go on, do this now. Anxiety will tell us quick run, or you're not safe right now, or, oh gosh, your heart's beating really fast and this isn't a good situation. This sensation's horrible. But if we can start to step into that seat of awareness and consciousness, you can find this power that you have within you. And that's really what I'm speaking to when I talk about mastering the anxious mind. We don't want to get rid of it. We don't need to get rid of it. We don't need to shame it or push it away. It's actually about accepting it, kind of bringing it closer in a way, and listening to what it might be trying to tell us, but also starting to see that you can work with that sensation, you can work with that feeling, and you every single one of us can handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the analogy comparing it to the urges to binge, because it is similar. It's a sensation in your body. It's a feeling that arises, and we are not our feelings. We can learn to experience them without identifying so much with them. And I think what you said about when you tell yourself you're an anxious person, then you're identifying with it. You're not seeing it as a passing sensation. And I like also what you said about it not completely going away, because I think that's where the difference in the urges to binge comes, because the urge is for this habitual behavior. And when you stop the habitual behavior, it deconditions the desire for that behavior. So the urges to binge do go away over time. And anxiety, I think, can decrease over time too if we change our mindset around it. But I think also having that expectation, like it will never completely disappear. And in a way, bringing it back to eating, yes, your urges to binge disappear, but you'll still have food cravings. You'll still desire food. You'll still like food. So it's all very similar.
There's definitely a big overlap. The interesting thing I find with anxiety is I use this metaphor, and I talk about this in my book, of it's like a dog at the door. Like you've got a pet dog and you've put it outside and you're trying to ignore the dog, but the dog's barking and it wants to be let in, and maybe it's scratching at the door. And this is equivalent. This is a metaphor to describe that sensation of anxiety. And when we're trying to ignore it and we try to pretend that it's not there, what happens is that the anxiety gets louder. It gets more intense because we're kind of not listening to it. So the dog will bark louder. It'll try harder to get our attention. But the irony is when we open that door and you let the dog inside and you say, oh, it's okay, you can come in. Maybe you towel him off so he doesn't get muddy footprints everywhere. Same thing with anxiety. When we actually take this softer approach and we meet that part of ourselves and we say, well, what is this fear trying to tell me? Is there something I can explore in here? Sometimes those needs are not the really obvious things. Sometimes it's just telling you, have you eaten lunch today? You had 2 coffees and that was way too much caffeine, or you need a better night's sleep. You're not sleeping enough. Sometimes it's literally telling us those things. Like if I have coffee, Kathryn, I'm going to experience that anxiety, guaranteed. If I forget to eat lunch, it will tell me that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's also pointing us towards things from our past that we can explore, which in the subconscious mind, as I was mentioning, is a fascinating area to move into and explore, where we can start to really find essentially parts of ourselves when we were a lot younger that didn't receive something, or we often weren't met in the emotional way that we needed. We didn't get the holding, the gentleness, the patience from often our parents or those who raised us. It's not about blaming anyone, but it's understanding so that you can now complete those needs for yourself and learn to meet that for you. And as you do that, it's like gaining these little pieces of yourself, gaining back your power each time, growing into more and more wholeness. So there is a real gift in this anxiety. It's kind of pointing us to certain pieces that we can then go and meet and love and tend to, and we can really grow into a more confident, calmer version of ourselves and mature those pieces from our past.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's almost like treating the anxiety in 2 different ways. One, like we talked about before, you see it as a sensation you don't have to identify it with. You see it as a passing storm, if we're going to go with the weather analogy. But on the other hand, if it has something to tell you, if you feel like there's a message there in it, if you feel like there's something to explore, then that's also a way to heal yourself from it.
Yes, exactly. And I find that often starting from this place of, okay, like this anxiety, it's a neutral thing. Let's just let it be there, allows for this practice of curiosity to then enter. And then we can start questioning. Then we can start saying, well, maybe I do need more sleep. And so, there is, I think it's helpful when we're not left in the anxious spiral of questioning, what does this mean? What does this mean? I need to go and fix this right now. When we have a process we can work with, and we can start to think, okay, could it be this? Could it be that? Have I eaten recently? Like, coming back to those basics can be really helpful. And that's why I have a checklist in the book. It's called the Resilience Checklist. And you can literally go through each thing just on one page and see, what is it that I might need to address, and where I can work on building this overall resilience, so that when it comes to this crazy world that we live in, with all of these fearful situations that are ripe and ready to trigger us and send us into anxiety, we've actually got some inner resilience, some strength, so that it's easier to manage in this crazy world.
Yeah, it's all those self-care practices, like you said, sleep, making sure you're eating, things like that, that can be difficult in our really busy world. And I would also say, for anyone listening who struggles with binge eating, when you give up this habit, this behavior, the dieting, the restriction, the binging, it lifts a lot of anxiety just already. And then you can work on whatever anxiety remains. So giving up binge eating is a huge reliever of anxiety. But you also mentioned that there's other nutritional things you can do to help yourself with anxiety. So could you address that a bit, as far as what nutritional improvements people could make that can help them with anxiety?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And it's one that I really love answering, because as someone who's literally lived through an eating disorder too, I am always very delicate and conscientious with how I approach nutrition.
Yeah.
I've gone through all the diets and the exploration in that regard. So for me, it's much less about any kind of rules and more about guidelines, to the point where we can think of it like, once you learn the basic ideas behind nutrition and why we want to choose certain foods and what a plate needs to look like to have more balance of nutrients, and what each element is doing for us, it's almost like learning how to speak a language fluently. First, you need to learn, and then you don't have to think that much about it. I don't think very much about the food that I prepare these days, but I follow these basic principles, and that is, firstly, where's my protein? I always have protein with a meal, because it's really important for building our brain chemicals that help make us feel calm. Things like GABA, serotonin, dopamine, they all come from amino acids that are literally found in our proteins. So these could be animal proteins, things like chicken breast or tuna, or it could be nuts, seeds, tempeh, fermented soy products, those kind of things as well. We've got many, many options available. And the other great thing about protein is that it helps to support our digestive processes. It gets our stomach acid really going so that we can digest our food really well. And it balances our blood sugar. So it ensures that when we do eat, there's a steady release of energy. So we're not getting these ups and downs and crashes. So that's really wonderful for our overall anxiety. The next thing I often think about is, do I have some fats in this meal as well? So we're talking about things like olive oil, or maybe olives. Nut butter, again, can be a great one. Avocado can be a lovely thing to add in there. And as we add these fats, we're actually literally nourishing our brain. Our brains are made predominantly of fat. So if we have a healthy brain, we've got clarity of thought, we're able to make decisions better. We're able to operate from that prefrontal cortex, where we can make clear decisions, where we can watch the anxiety and notice what's happening in a more balanced way, rather than when we are deprived of these nutrients and we're not able to use our brain as optimally. And the next part too is literally carbohydrates. They tell our body that we are safe, and carbs have been so demonized by the diet culture over the years. But carbohydrates, if menstruating women restrict carbohydrates, we will quite quickly start to see irregularities in our cycles. We might lose our period altogether. It's really important for ovulation and supporting our menstrual cycles, our hormonal health. And if anyone understands or has experienced the anxiety that can come in the days before your period, you'll understand how important the balance of hormones is for your overall well-being and anxiety resilience as well. It's kind of like those days before your period. It's like the veil is very thin, and the slightest thing can just send you into fear. And you'll find that there might be some stories you start ruminating on that you weren't worried about 3 days ago, and all of a sudden it seems like a big thing. You'll notice as well the relief when the period begins, and that's a big clue with hormones. So carbs tell our body that we're safe. They tell our body there's plenty of food. They tell our brain that it's similar to, you talk a lot about the restriction reaction that the brain has when it detects there's restriction. So even if you're consuming food, if you're restricting certain elements, there is still this perception of restriction. So if we're like following a low carb diet, the brain can still receive that idea that where there's a restriction. So we want to tell the body and the brain there's plenty of food. We're not in a famine. We've got plenty of energy, and complex carbohydrates can be a beautiful way to do that for ourselves as well. And we can look at things like different colors and whole foods, but these are some basic principles. I know it's so basic: protein, fats, and carbs, but once we understand that information, you could also think about it like learning the yoga poses and in yoga. And once you know the basic poses, you can just flow and you don't have to think about it so much.
I really love the idea of just getting back to basics. People, I think, a lot of times can overcomplicate the eating, and that creates more anxiety. And if you just think, okay, I need fats and proteins and carbohydrates, it can relieve a lot of your anxiety around food, because that's doable. And, I know for me, if I am missing one of those macronutrients, you do feel off. I feel like, if I don't have carbs with a meal, I'm like hungry really soon after, or, it does throw you off. And if you're on a constant blood sugar roller coaster where you're not really getting those satisfying healthy fats and proteins, then it can raise anxiety. It can create a lot of just dysregulation in your body. So I really like that. It's very stabilizing. Everything you described, it just seems like it keeps you on a nice, even keel.
Yeah, it does. And it's a lovely way to just show your body that you respect it and that you care for it, which I think after and going through that journey of not being able to control, in a sense of like not being able to respect your body, like really being out of control in that way with eating, there's something that feels very healing about just saying, you know what, I'm going to honor my body, not in a perfection way, I'm going to make sure that I'm giving my body the nutrition, the nourishment that it needs to thrive.
Yeah, totally. And you mentioned too, like when you give your body that nourishment, you're then able to operate from more of your rational brain, use your self-control functions in your prefrontal cortex. And that's really important when it comes to binge eating, when it comes to trying to break this habit. And, I want to ask you, a lot of times when people are in a very anxious fight or flight state, they find it a lot harder to dismiss those urges to binge, or to really experience those urges without being caught up in them and without acting on them. So in these moments when people are feeling so anxious, what are some practices they can use to get themselves back in their rational brain?
Yeah, such a great question. And I would say my answer to this would change often, because there are so many things we can do. Mm-hmm. And I hope that's really helpful for people to understand. It's like, what I'm going to tell you are a few things on a tasting platter. You can try each one. And if one isn't working, try the next one. And different things will work on different days. And it's kind of like when you're a new mom and you're learning your baby's different cries and you're trying to figure out what it needs as you listen to the anxiety, you'll start to figure out some days I really need this, some days I really need that. So to begin, I think it's helpful to just understand that anxiety is like a big rush of energy in us, and that energy needs to go somewhere. So sometimes moving our body can be really powerful. And if you can't get to the gym or actually do like a full workout because you're in the middle of work or whatever it might be, just get up for 1 minute, 60 seconds and just shake your body. Just like whatever feels right for you. When I say shake your body, don't overthink it. Just play some music if you want, play some Taylor Swift, shake it off, and shake your limbs. You'll find just 60 seconds of that will help to move a lot of that anxious energy. And it's actually part of releasing trauma from the system and these deep sort of fear programs that are within us. And so it's a beautiful way to regulate your nervous system. Another one that can be really powerful is the cold shower. And honestly, you can do this however you like as well. But for me, I like to have usually my regular shower, and then at the end, just a burst of cold water for 30 seconds to 60 seconds. Get it all over your body, and you'll find this very quickly sends you from this overthinking mind and like those thought cycles straight into your body, because you're so present in your body. You have to notice that there's cold water on me, and it's doing things on that more biological level too. It's triggering your vagus nerve. It's sending you into your parasympathetic nervous system. But that I love this idea that it's such a quick way to get back into your body, out of the mind, back into feeling, less thinking. And my third one, just to throw in there too, would be having a little bit of apple cider vinegar in a glass of water. And what this does is apple cider vinegar, and make sure you always dilute it. Do not take apple cider vinegar straight. But what that bitter taste does is it makes you salivate. It makes you produce saliva in your mouth. And this is one of the first phases of digestion. And if we are in the digestion phase in our body, if our biological processes are kicking in that are all involved in digestion, we cannot be in our fight or flight response at the same time. We can only be in one or the other, sympathetic or parasympathetic, which is our rest and digest mode. So having something that makes you salivate, like apple cider vinegar in a little bit of water, is going to create salivation. It's going to send you into that rest and digest response as well. That's such an easy one. We can do it at work. We can have a little bit of apple cider vinegar, in our desk, and have that ready to go. And you can even be sipping on that glass of water in a meeting. And it's a powerful one to have on hand.
Those are all great. They're simple, and just kind of snap you out of that fight or flight state and get you back in your body and feeling like you're capable of making decisions from that more rational place. So I appreciate all of that. I want to read, as we kind of close out this conversation, I want to read a quote and then have you describe it a little bit. In your book, you said, "It requires conscious effort to nourish your future with images, ideas, and dreams that feel exciting, warm, inviting, and satisfying to you. You must do this consciously because your mind will always default to feeding a future of doom and gloom where you expect the worst." And I really like that, because that's what our mind does. I've talked about on the podcast before, the negativity bias of the brain, and your brain seems to always point toward the worst case scenario. And instead you talk about consciously nourishing your future with images and ideas and positive things. So can you describe that and how people can incorporate that into their lives?
Yeah, totally. It's essentially taking this knowledge and understanding how the mind works so that we can essentially hack into that and utilize, leverage what we've got here, this machinery of the mind that we have to work with. It's going to keep defaulting back to a negative place. It's going to be looking out for the threats and all that can go wrong. So what we can do is start to, having this information in mind, really consciously choose to think about, well, what if it all works out? And really use your imagination, this amazing imagination that's so good at thinking about all the different details of all the stuff that can go wrong. They're going to judge me. I'm going to fail. It's going to feel like this. They're going to look at this. And we literally can almost viscerally sense it. What would it feel like if you had your ideal outcome? It's let's just use an example of going for a job interview and feeling nervous about that, or expecting that it's just going to be a disaster. You're going to stumble on your words. They're not going to like you. You're going to get the rejection call straight after. What if actually you spoke really well? And what if they really like you? What if you get along really well and you straight away, you can just tell that this is the right place for you, and you get this feeling in your body, and you can see them sending you that email saying, we'd love to have you work with us. What would that be like? And if you go into that job interview, here's the extra like bonus of this whole thing. You go into that job interview with that energy and that in your mindset, you are so much more likely to perform that way, to perform well. They will sense that in you, and you're actually upping your chances of getting the outcome that you want, which I find really fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. And as you're talking, I was thinking of correlations in binge eating recovery, because a lot of times people will think, oh, what will my life be like after? What will my weight be like? How am I going to fill my time? And they'll think of like all the worst case scenarios of what recovery will be like. But what if it's amazing? What if you feel great in your body? What if you're eating in a way that you love, and just reframing all of that?
Yes, exactly. And so it's really, really powerful if we can make that a habit that we do for ourselves. Even I'm thinking that's the like end of the year time. And when we're at this cusp of the year, we reflect on the year that's been, and we tend to think about what we've done. And sometimes our mind can very easily say, oh, I've done nothing, or like not much I'm sort of like basically in the same place as last year. But what if you actively, and I do this myself, I notice my mind wanting to say I've hardly done anything for the year. What if you actively make a list and choose to see all the ways you have grown, the things that have shifted, the ways you have taken steps forward, even if they're small, even if it was, just one shift you made, or one change, or something that a positive impact you made on another person's life. We are all able to do wonderful, positive things in this world. And they don't have to be huge accolades. They don't have to be trophies that we win. Often those are the more meaningful things anyway, is when we are just like making someone else smile. Like, how many moments did you have just feeling in connection with people? And maybe, especially if you're in this journey of self growth and healing, maybe it's just really appreciating and acknowledging the effort that you've been putting in there. That's another way that we can really reframe and start to see and nourish this idea that like we are doing better than we think.
Yeah, I really love that, especially as we approach, the end of the year, and just learning to see your life from a less anxious place, and learning to have a lens of love and positivity and curiosity. And I think it can just change everything. So I really appreciate the message that you shared today on this podcast. And can you let people know where they can learn about you and how they can get your new book?
Yes, of course. Well, the book's available on Amazon. It's called The Anxiety Reset Method, and it's in bookstores all across the US and Canada, which is super exciting too. But I'm over on Instagram. It's at Georgie the Naturopath, or you can find me on my podcast too. We've got an episode with you, Kathryn. It's called The Anxiety Reset Podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Georgie. I really appreciated having you on the show today.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you.
I'll include links to all of Georgie's information in the show description, as well as a link to listen to our podcast together on the Anxiety Reset podcast. Also, remember to sign up for the retreat with Coach Julie at brainoverbinge.com/retreat. Thank you so much for being here today. I wish you all the best in the new year, and I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.